The gentle hum of airplanes filled the Birmingham sky as a young girl lay in her backyard, watching metal birds dance among cotton white clouds. It was 1985, and while other kids her age were busy with dolls and games, she spent countless hours tracking flight patterns and drawing airplanes in her worn spiral notebook. Her mother, a dedicated high school teacher, would often find her daughter perched on the roof of their modest two-story home, face turned skyward, lost in dreams of flight. Instead of scolding her for climbing up there, she'd quietly join her, bringing along chocolate chip cookies and stories about the Wright brothers and Bessie Coleman. Her father, a civil rights attorney who fought daily battles in courtrooms, taught her that dreams weren't just meant for dreaming, they were meant for chasing. During dinner conversations, he'd share tales of breakthrough cases and persistent clients, subtly teaching her that the word impossible was just an opinion, not a fact. Growing up in their tight-knit community, neighbors would often see the young girl riding her bicycle with arms spread wide, making engine noises as she zoomed down the street. Some smiled indulgently, while others shook their heads when she confidently announced her intention to become a pilot. "Ain't never seen nobody like you flying those big planes," one elderly neighbor remarked. The girl simply smiled and replied, "Then I'll be the first you see." In school, she threw herself into mathematics and science with unusual determination for an 8-year-old. Her teachers noticed how she'd stay after class, asking questions about aerodynamics and gravity, concepts well beyond her grade level. During career day, while other students shifted uncertainly in their seats, she stood tall and spoke about cockpits and flight controls, her eyes shining with unwavering certainty. The local library became her second home. She'd spend hours poring over aviation magazines and books, memorizing aircraft specifications and weather patterns. The kind-hearted librarian, noticing her interest, started setting aside any new aviation materials that came in. Sometimes she'd find old pilot manuals at garage sales and save them for her eager young reader. Her bedroom walls slowly transformed into an aviation museum. Posters of various aircraft competed for space with her own detailed drawings. She saved every penny from her allowance to buy model airplanes, carefully assembling them late into the night. Each completed model hung from her ceiling, creating a fleet of dreams above her bed. When the traveling carnival came to town that summer, it brought along a small flight simulator. While other kids rushed to the cotton candy stands and Ferris wheel, she spent all her saved-up money on simulator rides. The operator, impressed by her dedication, let her have extra turns after the carnival closed. Those few minutes in the simulator felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. At her mother's teacher conferences, other parents would brag about their children's dreams of becoming doctors or lawyers. Her mother would simply smile and say, "My daughter's going to touch the sky." Some laughed politely, but her mother never wavered in her support, helping her daughter cut out newspaper articles about female pilots and taking her to small airfields on weekends just to watch planes take off and land. One defining moment came when her father's old college friend, an air traffic controller, visited their home. He spent hours answering her questions, drawing flight paths on napkins, and explaining radio communications. Before leaving, he looked her straight in the eye and said, "The sky's a mighty big place, honey. Plenty of room up there for someone with your spirit." These early years shaped not just her dream, but her understanding that some paths aren't just about personal achievement. They're about opening doors for others to follow. Every paper airplane she launched from her window, every model she assembled, every book she read was another step toward that vast, blue future she could already see so clearly. The acceptance letter from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University felt like holding a golden ticket to the future. After weeks of checking the mailbox 3 times a day, there it was, proof that dreams could take flight. The full scholarship was a blessing her family celebrated with happy tears and her mom's special peach cobbler. Moving from Birmingham to Florida for university wasn't just about crossing state lines. It was about crossing boundaries that had held too many dreams earthbound for too long. The campus buzzed with activity, filled with young people who shared her passion for aviation, though she quickly noticed she was often the only woman of color in her classes. Those first few weeks tested everything she thought she knew about determination. Flight training demanded more than just passion. It required a level of precision and dedication that pushed her to her absolute limits. The physics equations that had seemed challenging in high school now felt like old friends compared to the complex aeronautical calculations she tackled daily. Between classes, she worked at the campus coffee shop, serving lattes to fellow students while mentally reciting emergency procedures and memorizing cockpit layouts. Her regulars started calling her Sky Girl after noticing how she'd use coffee cups to demonstrate flight patterns during her breaks. The extra money went straight into a jar labeled Extra Flight Hours, every penny moving her closer to her goal. The first time she sat in the cockpit of a training aircraft, her hands trembled slightly as they wrapped around the controls. The instructor, a veteran pilot with salt and pepper hair, noticed her nervousness and shared a surprising confession. Even after 30 years, I still get butterflies before every takeoff. That's how you know you respect the sky. Her first solo flight came on a crisp autumn morning. As she completed her pre-flight checks, she could almost hear her father's voice reminding her that pioneers don't have the luxury of doubt. The moment the wheels left the ground, something clicked into place. This wasn't just what she wanted to do, this was who she was meant to be. Not everyone appreciated her presence in the program. Once, she overheard a fellow student say, "Some people are only here because of scholarships." Instead of letting the words ground her, she used them as fuel, studying twice as hard and staying twice as long in the simulator. Her determination started turning skeptics into supporters, one flight at a time. The campus library became her second home, just like the one back in Birmingham. Late nights turned into early mornings as she pored over weather patterns, navigation charts, and flight manuals. Sometimes, she'd fall asleep right there, waking up to find someone had thoughtfully draped their jacket over her shoulders, a small reminder that not everyone saw her as an outsider. Her part-time job barely covered the cost of extra flight hours, but she found creative ways to learn. She volunteered to clean the hangar just to spend more time around the aircraft. The maintenance crew, impressed by her curiosity, started teaching her about engine components during their lunch breaks. Every bit of knowledge was another step toward her goal. When things got tough, she'd write letters to her parents, sharing her struggles and triumphs. Her mother's responses always came with a reminder. "You're not just flying for yourself, baby. You're flying for every little girl who's ever looked up at the sky and wondered if she belonged there." Those words became her mantra during difficult days. The defining moment of her training came during a particularly challenging simulation. While other students struggled with an emergency scenario, she remained calm and methodically worked through the crisis. Her instructor pulled her aside afterward and said something she'd never forget. "You've got what we call the right stuff. Not because you're perfect, but because you understand that the sky demands both respect and courage." As graduation approached, she had transformed from a dreamer into a pilot. Her logbook was filled with hours, her mind with knowledge, and her heart with an even stronger determination. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to soar, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told their dreams were too high to reach. Fresh out of Embry-Riddle with a crisp diploma and even crisper pilot's uniform, she stepped into her first airline interview with high hopes. The interviewer, a man who'd probably been flying since before she was born, barely glanced at her impressive credentials. Instead, he spent 20 minutes asking whether she thought passengers would feel safe with her in the cockpit. She left that interview with her head held high and her heart a little heavier. The next few interviews followed a similar pattern. One airline representative actually suggested she consider becoming a flight attendant instead. "It might be a better fit," he said with what he probably thought was a kind smile. That night, she called her father, who reminded her that history makers don't ask for permission. They prove their worth through action. Her break came on a rainy Tuesday morning at a regional airline based out of Atlanta. The interviewer, a former military pilot, focused on what mattered: her skills, her knowledge, and her dedication to aviation. When he asked about handling difficult situations, she shared stories from her training that demonstrated her calm under pressure. For the first time, someone was seeing her as a pilot first, everything else second. Training at the regional airline tested everything she'd learned and then some. The schedules were grueling, the routes challenging, and the weather often unpredictable. But in the cockpit, none of that mattered. Up there, the only things that counted were skill, judgment, and the ability to keep passengers safe. Her first official flight as a co-pilot had her stomach in knots. As passengers boarded, she noticed a little girl pointing at her through the cabin window, eyes wide with wonder. The child's mother took a photo, and later sent a note to the airline saying, "Thank you for showing my daughter that her dreams have no limits." That photo found a permanent place in her flight bag, a reminder of why every obstacle was worth overcoming. Not everyone was ready for change. Some senior pilots would accidentally leave her out of pre-flight briefings. Others would make subtle comments about lowered standards. She answered them all the same way, with perfect landings, thorough knowledge of procedures, and an unwavering professional attitude that gradually earned respect from even her biggest doubters. Weather became her specialty. While other pilots might hesitate in challenging conditions, she had spent countless extra hours in simulators practicing every possible scenario. During one particularly nasty storm, her quick thinking and steady hands earned praise from both the control tower and her captain. Word spread quickly. If you wanted a smooth flight through rough weather, you wanted her in the cockpit. The regional routes weren't glamorous. They meant early mornings, late nights, and countless hotels in small towns across the country. But each flight built her reputation. Passengers began requesting her flights after experiencing her smooth landings. Ground crew members would smile and say, "Oh, it's you today," knowing she always treated them with respect and gratitude. One memorable day, an elderly passenger refused to board when he saw her during the pre-flight check. The gate agent started to look flustered, but she calmly walked over and engaged him in a conversation about her thousands of flight hours, her training, and her perfect safety record. By the end, not only did he board, but he apologized and asked for her autograph for his granddaughter. Between flights, she started keeping a journal of her experiences. Every entry reinforced what her parents had taught her. That change doesn't come from waiting for acceptance, but from proving through actions that barriers are meant to be broken. Her logbook filled with hours, her journal with stories, and her heart with an ever stronger determination to pave the way for others. As her first year drew to a close, she had earned a reputation that went beyond her appearance or background. Crew members requested to work with her, knowing she was always prepared and professional. Training pilots sought her advice on weather patterns and tricky approaches. She wasn't just surviving in the industry, she was thriving, setting new standards, and quietly changing perceptions one flight at a time. 7 years can change everything, and in aviation they certainly did. The young pilot who had once struggled to get her foot in the door was now being noticed for all the right reasons. Her logbook told the story. Thousands of hours in the air, countless challenging landings mastered, and a perfect safety record that spoke louder than any words could. One winter morning, while de-icing her plane in Chicago, she got the call she'd been hoping for. A major airline wanted her expertise not just as a pilot, but as a captain. The job offer came with 4 gold stripes and a significant pay raise, but what meant the most was the recognition. The hiring manager specifically mentioned her reputation for handling difficult weather conditions and her outstanding crew leadership. Moving to the major airline meant learning to fly bigger aircraft, but she approached it with the same determination that had gotten her through flight school. During simulator training, she impressed instructors with her ability to remain calm during emergency scenarios. "You've got ice water in your veins. One trainer commented after she successfully handled a simulated engine failure during takeoff. Her first day wearing captain's stripes felt surreal. As she walked through the terminal, other pilots nodded with respect. A group of flight attendants who had worked with her at the regional airline broke into spontaneous applause. But the most touching moment came when she stepped into the cockpit. Her co-pilot, a veteran with decades of experience, simply said, "It's an honor to fly with you, Captain." Weather remained her specialty. During a particularly challenging month when storms wreaked havoc across the country, she managed to maintain her schedule with minimal delays. Her secret wasn't just skill, it was preparation. She studied weather patterns obsessively, planned alternative routes before they were needed, and always kept her passengers informed. The airline's operations team started consulting her about weather-related decisions. Leadership came naturally to her. She made it a point to know everyone on her crew, from the newest flight attendant to the most experienced ground staff. During pre-flight briefings, she encouraged questions and ideas from everyone. "A safe flight is a team effort" became her motto, and her crews consistently received high marks for both safety and passenger satisfaction. The aviation industry started to notice. She was invited to speak at conferences about weather navigation and crew resource management. Other airlines sent their pilots to observe her pre-flight procedures. During one memorable presentation, a senior industry executive admitted, "We were wrong to ever doubt that someone like you could excel in this role." Between flights, she made time to mentor younger pilots, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. She never forgot her own struggles and made sure to share not just technical knowledge, but strategies for overcoming the unique challenges they might face. Her office became a regular stop for anyone needing advice or encouragement. One day, while reviewing weather reports in the crew room, she overheard two young pilots discussing a difficult approach into a mountain airport. Without hesitation, she pulled up the airport diagram and spent an hour walking them through the best techniques for handling the tricky winds and terrain. Later, they both completed the landing perfectly, crediting her guidance for their success. Her reputation for excellence led to additional responsibilities. The airline asked her to help develop new training protocols for severe weather operations. She worked late into the night, drawing from her years of experience to create procedures that would help keep crews and passengers safer. When the protocols were implemented across the airline's entire fleet, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing she was helping protect thousands of people she'd never meet. As her 7th year in the industry drew to a close, she found herself in a position she'd never imagined possible. Not only was she one of the most respected captains in the airline, but she had become a symbol of what was possible when talent and determination overcame prejudice and doubt. Young girls would often ask to take pictures with her after flights, and she always took time to encourage their dreams, remembering her own childhood spent watching planes from her backyard. It started as a routine day. She was deadheading, traveling as crew to another airport for her next flight assignment. Her captain's uniform was crisp as always, 4 gold stripes gleaming on her shoulders, wings pinned perfectly in place. She'd done this hundreds of times before, but this day would be different. The first-class cabin was nearly full when she boarded, her crew badge clearly visible. She found her assigned seat, 2A, by the window, and began storing her flight bag in the overhead compartment. That's when she heard the voice behind her. "Excuse me, but I think you're in the wrong section." She turned to find a flight attendant looking at her with barely concealed skepticism. "I'm crew, deadheading to Chicago," she explained calmly, reaching for her credentials. The flight attendant's expression didn't change. "This section is for first-class passengers and senior airline staff," the attendant insisted, despite the captain's uniform, despite the credentials, despite everything that should have been obvious. Several passengers had stopped their pre-flight routines to watch. Some looked uncomfortable. Others pulled out their phones. The flight attendant requested a second form of ID, then a third, examining each one as if they might be counterfeit. All while other deadheading crew members, None who looked like her sat undisturbed in their first-class seats. Her heart was pounding, but her voice remained steady. Years of handling turbulent weather had taught her that staying calm was crucial in any storm. She explained again that she was a captain with the airline, having just completed a flight from Denver. She showed her pilot's license, her airline ID, and her flight assignment papers. The flight attendant still wasn't satisfied. "Perhaps it would be more comfortable for everyone if you moved to economy," the attendant suggested, as if offering a favor. The words hung in the air like heavy storm clouds. A passenger in the row behind spoke up. "She's wearing a captain's uniform. Why are you doing this?" More phones were recording now. The lead flight attendant appeared, quickly assessed the situation, and immediately recognized the problem. Her face flushed with embarrassment as she apologized and reprimanded her colleague. But the damage was done. The incident had already begun spreading across social media platforms. Throughout the flight, other passengers kept glancing her way, some offering sympathetic smiles, others looking ashamed. She sat quietly, watching the clouds below, thinking about all the barriers she'd broken only to find new ones waiting. Her phone buzzed continuously with messages from colleagues who had already seen the videos online. What hurt most wasn't the humiliation or the assumptions. It was knowing that despite her achievements, despite her proven skill and dedication, despite the 4 stripes on her shoulders, someone could still look at her and see only what they expected to see. The same prejudices she'd fought throughout her career were still alive, just hidden behind more polite words. Landing in Chicago, she found reporters waiting at the gate. News travels fast in the age of social media. She could have walked past them, could have declined to comment, could have let the airline's PR team handle everything. Instead, she stopped and spoke with dignity about her 20 years of flying experience, her perfect safety record, and her hope that this incident would lead to positive change. The airline's initial response was predictable. A carefully worded statement about investigating the incident and reaffirming their commitment to diversity. But she knew from experience that real change requires more than carefully worded statements. As she headed to her hotel that evening, she made a decision. This wouldn't be just another viral moment that faded away. This would be a catalyst for genuine change. Looking out her hotel window at the planes taking off and landing, she thought about that little girl she'd once been, watching aircraft from her backyard in Birmingham. She thought about all the other little girls out there, dreaming of flying. They deserved better than this. They deserved a world where their uniforms spoke louder than their appearance, where their achievements mattered more than assumptions. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, millions had watched the incident unfold, and the response was overwhelming. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. Fellow pilots from airlines across the country began sharing their own stories, creating a wave of solidarity that crossed company lines and national borders. The morning after the incident, she woke up to find hundreds of emails in her inbox. Television networks wanted interviews. Aviation magazines requested statements. But what touched her most were the messages from other pilots, especially women and minorities, who saw their own struggles reflected in her experience. One message simply read, "Thank you for standing your ground. You stood for all of us." The airline's first response came through their social media team, a brief statement about investigating the matter. It felt hollow, like words copied and pasted from a crisis management handbook. The public wasn't having it. Passengers who had witnessed the incident shared their own videos and accounts, each adding weight to the story. #RespectTheCaptain started trending worldwide. Her pilots' union stepped forward with strong support. They called an emergency meeting where pilots from various airlines showed up wearing their uniforms, standing together in solidarity. The image of hundreds of pilots, all wearing their stripes and wings, made headlines across the country. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become a movement for change. Support came from unexpected places. a retired airline executive wrote an open letter acknowledging the industry's history of discrimination and calling for concrete changes in training and hiring practices. Ground crew members at various airports began wearing pins that read, "Respect every uniform." Even competitors of her airline issued statements supporting diversity in aviation. In the crew rooms across the country, conversations started changing. Veteran pilots shared stories they'd kept quiet for years. Young pilots spoke about their fears and hopes. The incident had cracked open a door that had been kept carefully closed, letting in light on issues that had been ignored for too long. Her own crew members organized a special tribute. When she arrived for her next flight assignment, she found the entire crew lined up at the gate, standing at attention. As she walked past, each one saluted. Passengers waiting to board joined in with applause. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a statement that she belonged exactly where she was. The airline's leadership finally realized they needed to do more than issue standard statements. They scheduled a meeting with her, expecting to smooth things over quietly. Instead, they found themselves facing a captain who came prepared with a detailed presentation about systemic issues in the industry and concrete suggestions for change. The meeting lasted 5 hours longer than planned. Social media continued to amplify the story. Photos emerged of young girls in pilot costumes, holding signs supporting her. Flight schools reported a surge in applications from minority candidates. The incident had sparked something larger than anyone expected: a conversation about who gets to dream of touching the sky. Parents began sending her pictures of their children dressed as pilots, many featuring young girls of color proudly wearing makeshift captain's stripes. Each photo came with stories of dreams awakened or reinforced. One mother wrote, "My daughter finally believes she can fly because she saw you stand tall." Airlines across the industry started examining their own practices. Training programs were revised to include specific modules about bias recognition. Crew policies were updated. But perhaps most importantly, people started paying attention to the small daily interactions that had always been dismissed as just the way things are. In the midst of all this attention, she maintained her professional composure. When asked about the incident in interviews, she consistently steered the conversation toward positive change rather than dwelling on the negative experience. "It's not about one person or one incident," she would say. "It's about making sure every qualified person feels welcome in that cockpit." Through it all, she kept flying. Because above the clouds, where she felt most at home, none of the noise mattered. Up there, she was exactly what she had always been: a pilot who had earned every one of her stripes, guiding her passengers safely through whatever weather lay ahead. 2 weeks after the incident, the airline's lawyers arrived with their usual tools: a settlement offer and a confidentiality agreement. The numbers on the paper were impressive, enough to buy a small fleet of private planes. But she had spent too many years breaking barriers to be silenced now. Pushing the papers aside, she pulled out her own proposal instead. Her counteroffer was simple but powerful. She would help create a comprehensive program to address bias in aviation. No confidentiality agreements, no hushed settlements. Just real, meaningful change. The lawyers exchanged nervous glances, but she continued laying out her vision, drawing from 20 years of experience both in the air and on the ground. Within days, she was meeting with aviation industry leaders, diversity experts, and veteran pilots to create what would become the Wings for All initiative. The program wasn't just about preventing discrimination. It was about actively creating opportunities. They established mentorship programs, scholarship funds, and new training protocols that would help reshape the industry. Her phone became a lifeline for young aviators facing challenges: a teenage girl struggling with flight school finances, a young man dealing with instructors who doubted his abilities, a woman returning to aviation after having children. She answered every call, shared every lesson she'd learned, offered every bit of encouragement she could give. Her office walls slowly filled with photos of pilots she helped guide toward their dreams. Working with flight schools across the country, She helped develop new curriculum modules about inclusive leadership and bias recognition. The materials weren't just theoretical. They included real scenarios, practical solutions, and clear guidelines for creating a more welcoming environment in every cockpit and crew room. The scholarship program she created, funded partly by her own savings and partly by industry partners, focused on supporting aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds. But it wasn't just about money. Each scholarship recipient was paired with an experienced mentor who could help navigate both the technical and social challenges of aviation. During one memorable workshop, she brought together pilots from different airlines to share their experiences. The stories poured out, moments of doubt, instances of discrimination, victories big and small. By the end of the day, they had created a support network that crossed company lines and spanned generations of aviators. Her initiative caught the attention of international aviation organizations. What started as a response to one incident was becoming a global movement. Airlines from other countries began adopting her training programs. Industry conferences that had once relegated diversity discussions to side panels now made them keynote topics. The most rewarding moments came from unexpected places. A ground crew member approached her after a flight to share how the new training had changed their entire team's dynamics. A senior pilot admitted that the programs had opened his eyes to biases he hadn't realized he carried. Small changes were adding up to major shifts in industry culture. She started visiting schools, not just to talk about flying, but to show young people that determination could overcome any obstacle. In one memorable session, a little boy raised his hand and asked, "Did you ever think about giving up?" She smiled and told him about all the times she could have quit but chose to soar instead. The room fell silent as she described how every no had only made her more determined to succeed. The mentorship program grew beyond her wildest expectations. Experienced pilots volunteered their time to guide newcomers. Airlines began actively recruiting from communities they had previously overlooked. The faces in crew rooms slowly started to reflect the diverse world their planes flew over. Through it all, she kept her captain's schedule, guiding planes through stormy skies and sunny days alike. Because at its heart, this wasn't just about changing policies or creating programs. It was about proving that the sky truly belongs to everyone brave enough to reach for it. The impact of her story rippled through the aviation industry like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Major airlines, once slow to acknowledge problems with bias, began competing to show who could implement the most effective diversity programs. What started as one incident had grown into a movement that was reshaping the entire industry. Training rooms across the country looked different now. New instructors brought fresh perspectives, and old training videos were replaced with modern materials that reflected the true diversity of aviation. During one session, a veteran instructor pulled her aside and said, "I've been teaching for 30 years, but I'm learning something new every day now." The changes weren't just on paper. Crew lounges that had once felt like exclusive clubs now buzzed with voices speaking different languages, sharing different experiences. Young pilots from all backgrounds found mentors who understood their challenges. The old guard who had initially resisted change began to see how diversity made their teams stronger. Her airline took the lead in implementing new policies. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, went through comprehensive bias training. But it wasn't the stern, lecture-style training of the past. Instead, it focused on real stories, practical solutions, and open dialogue. People actually looked forward to the sessions, where they could share experiences and learn from each other. One day, while checking her flight plan in the crew room, she overheard two senior pilots discussing a weather pattern. A young female pilot hesitantly joined their conversation, offering insights from her recent experience with similar conditions. Instead of dismissing her, they actively included her in the discussion. Small moments like these showed how the culture was truly changing. Flight schools reported a surge in applications from diverse candidates. The scholarship program she'd helped establish was flooded with promising applicants. During one selection meeting, A committee member teared up reading an essay from a young candidate who wrote, "For the first time in my life, I believe the sky is truly the limit for someone like me." The industry's response went beyond just hiring practices. Airlines began reviewing everything from uniform policies to crew scheduling systems, looking for hidden biases they'd never noticed before. Even the images in their advertising changed, finally reflecting the true diversity of their workforce and passengers. Technology played its part too. A group of pilots created an app where aviation professionals could share experiences and support each other. Another team developed virtual reality training scenarios that helped crews recognize and address bias in real-time situations. Innovation was coming from all directions. During a major aviation conference, she watched as airline CEOs competed to announce new initiatives promoting inclusivity. The same industry that had once been resistant to change was now leading conversations about diversity. Her colleagues joked that she'd started a revolution with a first-class seat, but she knew it was really about years of accumulated determination finally finding its moment. The most touching changes came from everyday interactions. A flight attendant stopped her in Dallas to share how the new training had helped her stand up for a colleague facing discrimination. A ground crew chief in Atlanta described how his team's efficiency improved after they started truly listening to every member's input. Real change was happening, one person at a time. Parents began sending her photos of career day presentations where their children proudly declared they wanted to be pilots. Schools invited her to speak, not just about flying, but about perseverance and courage. She kept a special folder of letters from young people who saw their own dreams reflected in her story. International airlines started sending representatives to learn from the programs she'd helped develop. What began as an American initiative was becoming a global standard for aviation excellence. During one international conference, a pilot from across the ocean shared how her story had inspired changes in their national airlines policies. Through it all, she maintained her regular flight schedule. Because up in the clouds, where the air is clear and the horizon stretches endless, she could see how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Each flight was a reminder that change, like aviation itself, requires both precision and patience, both skill and heart. 2 years later, she walked through the same airport where the incident had occurred, but everything felt different now. As the airline's chief diversity advisor, a position created specifically for her while she continued flying as captain, she saw the changes not just in policies, but in the faces around her. The crew room that morning buzzed with energy. A young pilot was giving her first pre-flight briefing, her voice steady and confident. The veteran pilots listened attentively, offering support rather than skepticism. In the corner, a group of trainees from different backgrounds studied weather patterns together, sharing knowledge and experiences freely. Her morning flight had a full crew complement that looked like a miniature United Nations. The first officer was a former mentee from her program, now fully qualified and confident in his role. During the pre-flight check, they talked about how he was now mentoring others, passing forward the support he received. Between flights, she often visited the training center she'd helped establish. The walls were covered with photos of graduating classes, each more diverse than the last. In the simulator room, instructors taught not just flight procedures, but also leadership skills that emphasized inclusion and respect. The old ways of "that's just how things are" had been replaced with "this is how things should be." Her inbox still filled daily with messages from around the world. A pilot in Asia sharing how her story had inspired changes in their national carrier. A flight school in Europe adopting her training programs. A small regional airline in Africa using her mentorship model to build their next generation of aviators. The scholarship program had grown beyond her wildest dreams. Dozens of young people who might never have had the chance were now earning their wings. During graduation ceremonies, she'd watch them receive their pilot licenses, remembering her own journey and seeing in their eyes the same determination that had driven her forward. Speaking engagements took her across the globe, but her favorite audiences were always the school groups. She'd tell them about her childhood dreams, about watching planes from her backyard, about all the people who said she couldn't do it. Then she'd tell them about all the people who now filled the skies because they refused to listen to "You Can't." Her original crew uniform hung in a display case at the airline's headquarters, alongside the story of that fateful first-class seat incident. But it wasn't displayed as a reminder of discrimination. Instead, it stood as a symbol of how one moment of injustice had sparked a movement for lasting change. The most rewarding moments came unexpectedly. Like when a passenger recognized her and shared how their daughter had changed career paths after hearing her story. Or when a senior pilot admitted that her presence had made him a better instructor for his own daughter, who was now in flight school. Her phone still rang regularly with calls from pilots facing challenges, but the tone had changed. Now they called not just for help, but to share victories, a successful check ride, a promotion to captain. A new policy changed. Each call reminded her that progress wasn't just about breaking down barriers, it was about building new paths for others to follow. On quiet nights between flights, she'd sometimes find a window seat in the crew room and watch planes take off and land. Each set of lights climbing into the dark sky carried not just passengers, but possibilities. Each flight crew represented not just their airline, but a future where skill and dedication mattered more than appearance or background. Looking back at that little girl who once watched planes from her backyard in Birmingham, she realized something profound. She hadn't just achieved her own dream of flying. She'd helped reshape an entire industry's understanding of who could touch the sky. And up there, among the clouds where she'd always felt most at home, she knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in aviation history.